Johnny Nash, Danny Sims, Bob Marley, Vita on the fast track in the Babylonian system. Is that what was happening? We are about to find out today. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is Amuna, and I pray everybody is doing well. This is the third installment for this here conversation. A little bit of a revisiting of some stuff that I read earlier this year and just adding a little bit of context to it based on the research. So, for those who may have just joined us, the first two episodes of this is revisiting the year between 1968 and 1972. They're about late 67, 68, and 72. And those years are the JAD years, right? According to Rita's narrative and historical narrative. And so those years are interesting because those are kind of transitionary years that brings the whole group, not only just Bob Marley and Rita, but the Wailers, this whole group that we know of today in its many different forms. It brings them to where they are eventually on Island Records and I3s and all of that nice good stuff. So if you missed those two episodes, this one is the third one in this particular series. So I'm going to read from Rita Marley's book, No Woman, No Cry. And then I'm going to cross-reference some stuff. She did let us know, and we found out who Margaret was. We saw that she was a model. She was in Jet magazine, and she is, to a certain degree, grooming her. She want to see leg, change her clothes, put on eyebrow pencil, put on mini frock, all of these things. And so Rita is kind of torn between Ital Rasta woman or maybe not torn, just going back and forth. She said she feels like she could still be Rasta and indulge or embrace certain things. That's what she was saying in the last chapters. But we are going to continue now, right? So it goes on to say, let me make sure that everything is up. Everything does sound up and good. Let me just ensure here and then we'll go on, right? I know there's a lot going on today, so if you catch it on the replay, it's still all good. You don't know already. It is still all good. I am reading now from, I did a whole video yesterday and there was no sound, so let me double check here. I'm reading from page 74 of the book. Yep, we good. So here we go. Here we go. So one interesting result of the association with JAD Records was Bob's trip to Europe, which included a purely accidental meeting with my father. And since she wasn't there, we are getting this information secondhand, right? In Europe. Danny Sims had taken Bob to Sweden to record the soundtrack for a movie, Want So Much to Believe, in which, as it turns out, none of Bob's original songs were ever used. Okay? So that particular movie, I was able to come across it. So let's take a look at it. Was a movie in which Johnny Nash was supposed to star. So we're going to get a time period for this now. And the time period is, let me go ahead and share my screen. Hold on one second. No, that's not the screen I want to share. Oh, here it is. You guys know it takes a little time to go in between this thing here. So let me go ahead and share. So we came across the movie, and here's the movie. I Want So Much to Believe. It actually had a foreign title as well. It's a quick little read. And then we're going to continue because it's giving us context of the year, when this happened, all of the stuff like this, right? So Want So Much to Believe is also Swedish name Vill sa garna tro, is a 1971. So we know that this year that she's speaking of is 1971. Remember, we're examining the years between 1968 and 1972. So this particular one is 1971. It's a romance film. It is directed by Gunnar Hoagland and stars Johnny Nash and Christina Sholin. So remember, at this time, Johnny Nash is the bigger star, right? Johnny Nash is the one who's been in the music industry for a good minute. He's the one who's getting more motion at this time. And Bob Dem is trying to break into the space. So he gets a movie role offer, and I actually pulled up the movie. Questionable. I think I'll go over there and. But anywho, here it is. Wants so much to believe, and he's co-starring with a European, which would at this time have been this melanated man, and I see why they're doing it in Europe, right? On a love scene or a romance movie. I guess it's a rom-com or whatever, with a European woman named Christina Sholin. So here is the flyer for the movie. I can't read that because that's all. I think there should be a better promotional flyer. And we see it here. And then we see starring Johnny Nash. It gives you all the other stars. And then it jumped down and says music by John Bundrick, Bob Marley, and Johnny Nash. And the release date of this was the 4th of September, 1971. Okay, so we see that this movie was released the latter part of that year, which would have to place him, because if they're going to go do the score for the movie had already been shot, right? So the score usually comes at the end. And so as we see here, yeah, let me go ahead and click this thing right here. I think there's a little quick, here is the movie. The other name for the movie also is Love Is Not a Game. Will you stop? The other name for the movie is, why is this stuff playing all over my screen? Here is a Swedish airline stewardess fall in love with a Black American man. That is drama and romance. So here's the movie where Danny Sims, it is said, says, hey, Bob, you should come over. You're a writer. Come over and help. So this is what Rita is telling us in this moment. When it says one interesting result of the association with JAD Records was Bob's trip to Europe, which included a purely accidental meeting with her father, because remember, her father had left many years ago. Danny Sims had taken Bob to Sweden to record the soundtrack for a movie, Want So Much to Believe, in which, as it turned out, none of Bob's original songs were ever used. Okay, so this is the movie here. Once again, that is not Johnny Nash, and that's his co-star. I did see it, coincidentally, on YouTube. Let me just, for hold on. Then we're going to go forward. Let me see here. So this is a little clip from the movie right here. Oh boy. Let me just skip forward here. It's typical, I'm going to tell you the value, typical 1970s, but I don't know if the movie was too raunchy or too racy for the time. I don't know. But let me see. There goes Johnny Nash in the movie. Okay. Getting it in. Yo, not the George Jefferson. But anyway, let me continue. Homie was buzzing the George Jefferson, everything, the Sherman Hemsley. Okay, all right, boom. So you guys get the point. Let me go back here and get back into my thing. Hold on one second. Let me clear up my screen. So that was that. So let's continue to hear what Rita is saying. For those who just joined us, welcome to the conversation. So we're gonna continue to hear what Rita is saying. Yo, that movie bust was everything. All right. So it says here. So we saw the movie. Bob hated cold weather, but he had moved to the cold basement of the house where Johnny Nash's entourage was staying in order to get away from their lifestyle. Okay. The drugs, she says, the whores, everything he disapproved of. Okay. He told me later that he thought he was going to die of cold and had said to himself, if he's gonna die, let him die in the basement because they were eating pork upstairs and cooking this and that. And oh, poor Bob. And if we remember, Rita's go to phrase is poor Bob. Okay. That was her go to phrase, right? So again, he's in this life because he's trying to get to his goal. He's trying to spread the music. This is what we're being told. He's trying to spread his message, but he has to get into this unsavory space amongst unsavory characters to glean this opportunity. And now we begin to understand, if we didn't before, why the other whalers was like, bruh, I'm out. When they eventually joined on the European tour of this JAD the first time, they're looking to kind of, no, I think it was the Chris Blackwell. They're like, yo, this is too much, right? Why is Rastaman in these places, right? So Bob thinking that he can be amongst this stuff and, just hold his order and do what he needs to do. Anywho, he was going through a hard time having no friends there and no one to talk to. Someone made a tape of him in a bedroom there singing solo with just his acoustic guitar. Especially on Stir It Up, I can hear all the loneliness in him. Stir it up, little darling. Stir it up. It's been a long time since I've had you on my mind. So she seems to be lamenting to me. She seems to, again, be in her poor Bob situation. But anyway, I suppose that's why it seems like such a miracle that he and my father got together. I think they thought so too. In later years, Papa used to tell this story over and over. At that time, Papa was working as a taxi driver and playing music in Stockholm. One night, a friend, knowing where Papa was from, said to him, a young man came in from Jamaica, a young man named Bob Marley. He's somewhere in town with that American Johnny Nash. But let's pause for a second on him meeting the father. Wait a minute. Let's pause for a second on him meeting the father because we have some insider information from one of the people who was working with him on the score. So I'm going to share my screen now because I thought this was an interesting insight on that time when he was in Sweden. Okay, because that's where this movie would have been made, right? So let's go ahead and share that. Oh, wait, not that one. Okay. So one of the musicians that was working with him on several projects was this musician here, John Rabbit Bundrick. We just saw his name. Actually, I closed it. We just saw his name on the paperwork for the movie, right? So he was one of the ones who was there. Actually, let me just pull it up again. What's the name of this movie again? So that we could just cross-reference that before. Want So Much to Believe. All right. Just so that we can cross-reference it here. Here on when it says music by John Bundrick, Bobby Marley, and Johnny Nash. So this John Bundrick is this person. He's still alive, and he has a blog, and he is, what is it? And he is sharing his experience. All right. So let's continue. So on this page, it says tributes to Nash, Johnny Nash, and Bob Marley. This is his blog post from back in 2020. So to my understanding, he's still alive. So this is the guy here. It's a European guy. This is another picture here that is posted of him. This is him with his hand pan him hip Kimbo in at the studio. We see Bob forever screw-faced. They have it over his head right here, but forever screw-faced, the perpetual screw-face, okay? We see him in the back of this guy here, shoulder, right? Doing the screw fit. He had his afro. He wasn't even in his full locks form. We see Johnny Nash here leaning on the equipment. We see somebody named Fred Jordan, whatever they were looking at, and having a conversation. And then we see it say John Rabbit Bundrick. So this is the guy, and Bob Marley, as well as Johnny Nash. All of these musicians were working on this particular movie. And then it says Europa Film Studio, Stockholm, Sweden, 1971. So he did go to where he said he was going to go. And based on these pictures, he was doing what he was supposed to be doing, which was music. So let's continue. This is also another picture, and we could tell it's him from his head back and the way he's cutting tens, that this is Bob with his guitar, and this is Johnny Nash. Also, them, I guess, working through what needs to be worked through so that they can get the music together. And it says at the bottom, Back Garden in Stockholm, summer of 1971. And it's copyright by John Rabbit Bundrick. Okay. So, and this is him, the musician at that time. So let's read a little bit about his experience. It says songwriter John Rabbit Bundrick worked with Bob Marley in the early 1970s when Marley was a songwriter for Johnny Nash and Danny Sims. So Rita is telling us in her experience what happened, but she wasn't there. But now we're getting the bird's eye view from somebody who was there, right? It says songwriter. It says, as if by magic, Bob arrived at our house in Sweden in the summer of 1971. He came to write songs with and for Johnny Nash and to help in the recording of the soundtrack for a film in which Johnny was starring with Christina Schloling. And we just seen the film. That's the same thing that Rita said. This is the same thing that the guy's saying. That's the same thing. Because some people be like, this person, I tell a lie. I've said this before. And so this cross-reference, it'd be like, Amuna, why can't you just get the hype and read? No, because when we say somebody's lying, we have to be specific on what we think they're lying about, right? Because that's you're leveling an accusation. Does it apply across the board? Are some parts of what they're saying right or wrong? So, I go through these exercises. So based on that, all of what she said and what she was told and what happened is lining up. Okay. It says, Bob and I were in as songwriters since Johnny had the music rights to the film. He also published everything we turned out, whether it was used or not. Remember, because at this time, they have the publishing rights, JAD does, for the Wailers, Rita, Bob, all of them. And this becomes a problem later on. So based on what he's saying, everything that they turned out, they published and owned, right? The record company. He says that they lucked out and wrote the film theme song. Sadly, nobody has ever heard it or seen the film. They had the big premiere in Stockholm, and the next night, the film closed. I mean, it's giving controversy. I mean, there may have been, we saw a little preview on the film just now. It's giving, where are we going with this? And in 1971, I don't know. Let's look a little bit more at the film as to why it possibly, maybe it was too forward for the time. It's a possibility. You have this man, this melanated man in a room. I don't know what audience they were looking to go for, but they said it premiered one time and that was it. And this may be why. That may be why. It may have been too much. So let's go back here. They're like, and it never showed again. I wonder why it never showed again. At that time, civil, especially in America. I mean, I don't know what was going on in Sweden, but anywho, it says here, sadly, nobody has ever heard it or seen the film. They had the big premiere in Stockholm, and the next night the film closed. He says, I had never heard of Bob or reggae before. So obviously, he says he thought, what the blink is this? I have often eaten those very words since then. 1 minute Bob wasn't there, and the next minute Bob was there, and we all worked hard and played hard. When he say we all, what did he mean by that? Because according to Rita's narrative, Bob was staying in the cold basement of the house where Johnny Nash's entourage was staying in order to get away from their lifestyle. So who's the we all who was playing hard? I don't know. He says the drugs, the whores, everything he disapproved of. He told me later he thought he was going to die of the cold and said to himself, if he's going to die, let him die in the basement because they were doing extracurricular stuff. So I don't know exactly who the we is in this particular statement, but we're going to continue. Bob was shy of or didn't respect the Swedish musicians Johnny had hired, and he usually stayed away from them. When they did approach him, he mumbled. I thought this part was funny. He mumbled and stared at them with a far distant glare. Then he would coyly move away to escape from them, grumbling something that sounded like RCBC. That's the YouTube version. Okay, you know, if you know, you know, RCBC. Okay, or something that I'm sure nobody could quite make out. So he's cussing them. So imagine him being in this environment, according to what this witness experienced. I mean, the inner turmoil, right? In the studio and at home, Bob taught him how to follow him with a reggae feel that he never knew existed. He would play the chinka rhythm on the guitar, then yell out to me, "Hey, Rob, man, on the organ, you play this, man. Cha, what kind of chaka, 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 chaka." Oh, you know, Jamaica had to tell him that. Anywho, so this is the movie we just saw, Want So Much. But he's saying that this is the soundtrack and it was re-released. So let me jump down here. There's another. No, this is later on. Let's read, because what happens is that in 1971, he leaves, comes back. Apparently, he comes back to Jamaica, or he goes somewhere, and then they leave Stockholm, Sweden, and they end up in London. So let me just read that part. He says, when they moved from Stockholm to London, they lived in an apartment building on Tottenham Court Road. My cat got squashed. Oh, that's terrible. Okay, his cat got squashed. Bob had a specialty soup that he made in the kitchen called fish head soup or fish tea soup. And I mean, he had it on the stove and left the room. Marlene came down to the kitchen when Bob was out of the room. She saw and smelled it and thought it was junk stuff, so she threw it away down the garbage chute. When Bob came back for his soup, it was gone. He went mad, yelling at us all. Temper much? But when he found out Marlene did it, he gave her a cuddle and said it's okay. He was after Marlene. Listen this now. I think this is important to note. Now, according to John, what's his name again? Rabbit. What's his name again? I don't want to mispronounce his name. John. We'll call him John. He is saying he was there and he lived months with Bob, both in Sweden and now in London. He says when he find out, so he's probably like, yo, who that's from a fish head, brethren? And he probably getting on the most way. Then he says he gave her, when he found out it was the woman, he gave her a cuddle and said it's all okay. He was after Marlene during our whole time together. LOL. Huh? So the man is there with his wife, and according to this man, something not right. But anyway, let me continue. He was after Marlene during our whole time together. LOL. I had to watch them all when Marlene was around. She was a good catch. Bob Marley, Chris Blackwell brought me in on keyboards because I worked with Bob in Stockholm with Johnny Nash for a year before moving to London. And I think this is how, I was reading something else, how Bob Marley becomes in touch with Chris Blackwell through this guy here, right? Oh, where are we? For a year before moving to London. Bob taught me himself the reggae organ style in a studio in Stockholm. So when Island acquired Bob from Danny Sims, Johnny and Bob's manager and publisher, Chris Blackwell, came straight to me to do the job. Isn't that interesting? Why? If what he's saying, and for those who just came, this is the person who's talking. This is a picture of 1971 in Sweden. This is Bob here with his back turned. That's Johnny Nash. And this is them in the studio working on the soundtrack. So that is curious. Very, very curious. There was one more thing that I wanted to read. Let me see if. So now he says, so that was in the summer of 1971. So once again, because this becomes interesting or important later when uh when um when Rita talks about 1971, quote, the summer of 1971 was such a low time. So this is kind of giving us context of the summer of 1971, right? So on one side, Bob is nowhere around. He's doing what he's doing, and something, whatever is going on with her, she's saying that it was a low time. Let me continue. So now let me jump back here. So he meets the father in Stockholm. It says, and Papa said, what, Bob Marley? Bob Marley, but the name sound familiar. I think my daughter's husband named Marley. Let me see the guy. So he got in touch with the person who was doing the cooking for Johnny Nash and said, let me see the guy Marley, man. Tell him Rita father come in. And when Bob arrived, Bob came up from the basement and there was my father saying, yes, man, Rita is my daughter. You're married to my daughter. Because this would be the first time he's meeting him, right? Bob said it was like heaven. It was a release, as if he'd gotten out of prison, a prison term in the Stockholm basement. His letter said, guess what? I met your father and he's teaching me to play some new stuff on the guitar. Bob said he could barely believe it had happened and purely by chance. From then on, Papa would come in the evenings and take him out for food and a smoke, and their relationship grew. It was my father who taught Bob some techniques on the classic guitar because remember, before he left Jamaica, her father was a musician, but him never did a go on with nothing. And him sister said, listen, better you go England and make something of your life than you sit down here and not do nothing. So she was also drawn to the music because her family was into it. It says things he himself had learned after immigrating, which helped Bob to write to a more advanced level and to experiment with better chords. I remember I got the letter. I was so happy. I wrote Bob, here I've been suffering and wondering what's happened to you, and there you are hanging out with my papa. So we see she's saying 1971 was terrible, but she's also saying how she did that suffer, because let me put it in her own words. Of course, I was glad to see Bob when he came home. I'd been lonely and worried. In those days, you couldn't pick up a phone. You had to stand by the gate and wait for the postman. Though with 3 children to care for, I didn't have much time for standing and waiting. Still, whenever I wasn't working, doing something, I was back to asking myself, is this L there? Is this what my life is going to be? What kind of future am I making for myself and my children? Because remember, she has a lot of abandonment issues, according to the story. The same father, he leaves, the mother leaves, the baby father for the first child leaves, goes to England. So her mind could very well be playing tricks on her as to whether or not he's going to be coming back, especially when she's not hearing any word. So hold on, let me pause here. Because this gives some more insight. So let's read John's account of, because he was there, right? He says that he moved from Stockholm with Johnny Nash and Danny Sims and his lady to Chelsea, London. The lady who he just claimed that Bob was trying to put moves on, England, in October 1971. My total earnings from October to December was staggering £600. From working with Nash on the I Can See Clearly Now album from CBS, he got paid a blistering £300. And from working at the same time with Island Records on the Kosov Kirki Tootsie Rabbit album, I got paid another scorching, £300. I spent £500 of it, leaving me with a grand total of £100 of savings. I've made it, he says. I earned the money and then spent it. That's a sign of success, man. I was very lucky, actually, while I was still working with Johnny Nash in Stockholm, that he managed to get the KKTR gig in London via an old deceased friend named Repop Kwakuba, who at the time was an African Ghanaian percussionist for the famous Steve Winward and Traffic. So let me jump down here. So he's talking about how he was getting through in the music business. Hold on. Because he's going, hold on. So Chris Blackwell gets a hold of his demos. He liked the way he worked and what he was generally about at the time, and he liked his work with Johnny Nash. And Bob Marley, who was also living with them in Stockholm, on board, as he already told us that. He's repeating himself. But let me jump down here. So he says, anyway, he's in London in 1971. He's been trying to get here from Texas since 67. Bob, too, lived with them in Sweden and worked as a songwriter for Johnny Nash, who owned all of Bob's publishing at the time, along with Danny Sims at Cayman Music, joined them in London after a short break away from the camp. So Bob went away in 71 after he finished writing, and then it says that he came back, okay? And that's going to be reflected in the storyline. So we have two witnesses. And then I came across some recordings that is dating to 1971. For those who may be asking, where was he during this time? Let me continue. No, that's not the one I wanted to read. There's one that I wanted to read that speaks about how they got stuck. He worked hard for Johnny Nash. I'll leave the link for those who want to write it. They lived there. Okay, they lived in the flat. He said that they moved from house to house. They moved around London a lot in 1972. This is jumping, but I'm just going to read it for the purposes of context. He says when they first got there from Stockholm, their first address was Old Church Street, 333 Kings Road, Southwest 3 Flat 5. They lived there from October 1971 to January 1972. It was him, his Swedish lady, Johnny Nash, Danny Sims, all living together under the same roof. Then on the 27th until the 27th of 1972, they moved someplace else. He says Bob joined them at this address. Another move came in April. And so they're moving all about. All right. Let me jump down. There's a part that he talks about. There's a part that he talks about what happens with the money. I'm gonna have to come back on it. I'm gonna have to come back on this because he's in 1972. How they end up getting stuck, I'm gonna have to come back and read this and properly identify it. But that's bringing us up to speed on what was going on that first European trip, right? So let me continue here. Which spot were they? So he meets up with the father. How they lose the money is interesting. How they get stuck over there is interesting. But where are we? Okay, it says here. This is Rita now. Working with JAD, she had stopped acting as a sales manager and began just as a singer, even though Bob and her were bound to keep your eyes open. We're going to sign contracts. What did she say? Although Bob and I were bound in a, quote, keep your eyes open, we're going to sign contracts understanding. What was that? What understanding was that? It says, but then we started meeting lawyers and accountants. And anyway, I couldn't be in the studio and out there selling records too. Still, we found out soon enough that JAD was covering Wailers music. Stir It Up was a big hit for them, and Guava Jelly, which Barbra Streisand also covered. So because they owned all the rights to it, it's if you recorded it under that contract, then technically they own it. All right. JAD used Bob's capacity as a songwriter, but they wanted to make a star of Johnny Nash, not of Bob Marley. And Bob Marley wanted to be his own self, the person he had a vision of himself becoming. So they got into a whole 360 deal. They got into a deal, but It says we were getting only minimum royalties because they had everything set up so that they owned the publishing, the copyright, and all of that. It is a business. It is a business. But again, remember, we already went over in episode 1 that she was just pressed. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? When they going to do it? Where they going to do it? So did you read the contracts? Probably. Maybe skimmed it. It says, let me drink some water, yeah. They're still relatively young at this point, but nonetheless, it says here, just before the association with JAD was over, Bob found himself stranded in London with Peter and Bunny. After Bob's stint in Stockholm, Danny Sims had sent for the two other Wailers with some idea that he would promote them by sending them on tour in England. So did he go back to Jamaica? Because the other rabbit guy says that Bob went away and then he came back, right? So one would assume that he came back to Jamaica and then went back to Europe. So she's kind of merging these two situations together. So the first time was in Sweden for the soundtrack. The second time, he wants to try a thing and see whether or not throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, right? It says Danny Sims had sent for the two other Wailers with some, so she ain't Bunny and Peter, right? And that he would promote them by sending them on tour in England. They played a few dates, but nothing more happened. And one morning they woke up in their cold water flat to find they'd been abandoned altogether. Nash and Sims had left for Florida. Bob managed to make a connection that would later serve them all well. But as things stood then, they got the plane fare for home. And that was that. It wasn't really that was that. There was a lot of other stuff going on. That's what I'm trying to see. Let me go back and get it real quick and see. Because from what the guy was saying, Johnny Nash and them went broke over there. And hold on. And because of that, they ran out of money. Because if we remember in the beginning, let me try to see if I can find it. In the beginning of the conversation, he was being funded when he was in New York. Then he had, then they went, the other JODA Records was bankrupt. And then they went to Jamaica and formed, according to the story, JAD. And so now JAD is this fledgling record company that doesn't have long money. So when they were over there, it's like the way the guy is setting it up, they're moving from pillar to post. They're moving all over the place. And when they were over there, they ran out of money. I want him to say it, but I can't remember. Hold on, let me see here. He says they tried to start gambling the money to gamble to try to get the money back. And when they couldn't is when they dipped. And essentially, Bob them, from the story we've heard, because this link already is made with Chris Blackwell, through whatever resources, they go and propose. Actually, there's a mediator that proposes this Chris Blackwell deal. Hold on. If this guy is willing to have a conversation, he would be interesting to talk to. But for now, we have his blog post. I know I read this thing. 1 second. Thank you for bearing with me as I hold on. Okay, I'm not able to find it. So essentially, that's what he said happened. He goes more specifically into it, but it must be in one of these things that I can't remember. So with that, I'm going to keep reading and then I'm going to wind down. It has to be in the year 1972. Let me look one more time. Hold on. Like they were playing cards. Anywho, this is taking too long for me to find it. Anywho, if I find it again, I'll just make a separate video. Let me continue. So it says here, little or none of the material recorded as demos for JAD was released during Bob's lifetime, but the market was flooded with it after he passed. He had been so inexperienced. Ma'am, welcome to those who just joined us. She said he had been so inexperienced and lacking proper guidance or preparation that we had been. I was like, I thought we'd been misled. So she's saying here they was finessed. They were finessed. Okay. And it also comes through a level of, hungriness, a level of desperation. Like, yo, this is, and people see that. They see that, like, oh, these people, they'll just take anything I give them. Because why? Of the position that they're in, right? So she admits that they were misled. So at the time, they just marked JAD as an experience that had, in any case, been good for them. But then it was over. The contract was up. They didn't know how long it would be before a new contract came along. But that's not according to the story. It wasn't up in that sense. Chris Blackwell bought them out of, I'm gonna have to come back and talk about that. Chris Blackwell, according to the story, bought them out of that contract, but they still had to pay some level of royalties to JAD Records. So the way she's simplifying it, it doesn't really read that way when you look at the other accounts. But anywho, we didn't know how long it would be before a new contract came along, or that we would wait out some more hard times before the world began to take notice. When it did, though, it embraced Robert Nesta Marley. Well, according to Esther Anderson, it took some more work before the world took notice, right? It said, I was to sing with him for the last most successful years of his life. Apart from our personal relationship, working with him was always new, always interesting. Everyone who ever did agrees to this. As a good friend once said, Bob was one of a kind and truly a prophet sent. I didn't wait until he passed to give him his flowers. That's interesting because I literally just heard an interview verbatim. Wait a minute. Verbatim, that last quote, the interview from what's the name of the show? I just watched it. What's your name again? Marcia Griffith's interview. She literally just said that. She did an interview a few weeks ago. She literally just said that verbatim. So I don't know if that was something that they said amongst themselves, but yeah. So with that was the fast life that he experienced in that particular time. We are definitely going to come back and continue in this 1971, because when Bob is over in 72, when he's overseas, trying to make headway, she's back at home. She's now going to become pregnant again. And this third time it's with Stephen Marley. So that is going to continue because the years didn't just stop at that point. But I will come back to see the thing that I was looking for that, if I don't find, it's going to annoy me. But with that said, where we at? 43. Let me open the mic really quick, see if anybody has anything to say. I know there's a lot going on today, election and all of that stuff. So I am not going to stay long. I'll put the link right here. Let me know what you have to say. Let me know your thoughts. If not, let me put here if anybody wants to see and take a look at the blog for themselves. That is the blog right there. And yeah, that's pretty much what, and that movie is crazy. This is the link for that movie too. Talk about it only showed one time. I wonder why. I wonder why. So with that said, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and relax. Everybody have a blessed night until next time, right? I'll be back, most I willing. Let me run this commercial real quick for Island Twist, because you don't know. I haven't had any time to finish writing a new book, but hey, Island Twist is still up there. Let's make it great. Let me, hold on one second. There's so much going on. I haven't been able to follow up with the reading, but Island Twist follows Jackie Brown, a young girl who finds herself head over heels for the new island boy at school in fresh outer yard, and Jackie has the fever. But as she navigates the ups and downs of her new crush, things quickly spiral out of control when her not so secret admirer becomes determined to sabotage her relationship. So check out the new novel, Island Twist, over on Amazon today. Now back to the story. All right, all right, all right. So the link for Island Twist is in the box as well as other things. Any questions, comments, feedback, feel free to put it in the box below. Give thanks, everybody. Be safe and have a blessed night.